Hey everyone, welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. In the Mobile User Acquisition Show, we feature interviews with the smartest folks in mobile and growth who share invaluable, actionable, tactical insights on every aspect of mobile growth and marketing, not to mention some adjacent areas just as well. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is presented by me, Shamant Rao, CEO of the mobile growth marketing firm Rocketship HQ, and produced by Karishma Sundaram, our superstar content marketing manager at Rocketship HQ. Each episode includes strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile growth marketing that you can use to unlock tremendous growth for your app in a sustainable and capital efficient manner.
Our guest today is Violeta Pirnog, Senior Performance Marketing Manager at Blinkist. Violeta joins us on the show today to talk about what to many would appear to be an unusual channel for UA, native ads on Facebook. In today's conversation, Violeta starts from the very basics, explaining how native ads work on Facebook and why they really form a very different user experience. She talks about the user flow and the background data flows that are needed for optimization, and talks about how testing works in this context. We also spoke about how products can decide how to dip a toe into native ads with Facebook's instant experience and to build up native ad campaigns thereafter. This is an incredibly insightful episode about native ads, and we're thrilled to present it to you today. Enjoy. I'm very excited to welcome Violeta Pirnog to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. Violeta, welcome to the show.
Hi, so nice to be here.
Yeah, so very thrilled to have you because we've only crossed paths digitally every time we've done so. I've certainly learned a lot from you. You've always been very insightful, very interesting. I'm excited to dive into some very unique perspectives you're going to bring on a topic that hasn't been talked about much. So definitely thrilled to have you on the show. So welcome again.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to be able to talk about things that haven't been covered before. To be fair, it is, I think, kind of special as well because I've been following your podcast and in general your newsletter before that. And you always seem to cover really interesting and insightful topics. And so I'm really genuinely honored to be invited and to be able to contribute to this. So thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Cool. Let's get started, right? We're going to talk about winning with native ad campaigns, particularly on Facebook. That's not a combination that a lot of people talk about often. To start with the basics, can you tell us what native ad campaigns are?
Yeah, definitely. Essentially, ad campaigns, it's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? It's paid content is its definition. It's a piece of content that would usually seem as organic, but of course, a really insightful team of brilliant marketers behind it have optimized it, the end user journey, so that they would actually make the user who's being served that ad interested in getting to know more about the product. So essentially, it's a relatively unused format, especially for Facebook. In general, I think brands and advertisers love native ads because the click-through rates tend to be higher and the engagement is a bit stronger. Also with the added side effect that increases your brand awareness. Actually, what's also interesting is that only around half of the people who are being served these kinds of ads actually know that they're being served ads. And of those, only half are skeptical, while the other ones are actually fine with it. So yeah, it's essentially a soft sell of your product.
And I was just very curious. So you said about half the people watching native ads don't think that's an ad. I imagine everybody watching a non-native ad knows. And you said half the remaining half hate it and half like it. I'm curious as to, for a traditional ad, how many people would you say actually like it, and how many people would just hate it? If you had to take a guess.
That's a really good question. I think it really depends on the platform. I think on some platforms like Google, for example, they've become, less obvious about signaling their ads and the sponsored results, search results, for example. I think that's one of the best things to look at, like the evolution over the years of how they've been signaled. On Facebook, again, it's different, and in the end, it all really depends on the platform. I think it also depends on the target audience, because people who are more like tech savvy or like have been used to being on socials or more often and been used to ads are able to identify them easier, whereas they just aren't there a lot. Maybe they don't look into that as much.
Yeah, certainly, right. And the way people react is very, very contextual. So in a native ad campaign, if you're running this on Facebook for a mobile app, help us understand what the user flow looks like.
Yeah, so the user flow is not that different from the usual app install campaigns, but it is a bit longer. So essentially what happens is from the ad in the platform, people are taken to a magazine article. And what happens there is essentially there is a smart banner that is also sticky, so it stays with them the entire page. And of course, there's a CTA there, and then takes them to the App Store. So it's a bit of a longer funnel. It doesn't take you directly to the App Store, but you do eventually go there, ideally. Essentially, it's a bit of a longer funnel, and it provides context. It's a really great opportunity, especially for products where this is needed. So especially content-driven products. So like Blinkist, for example. And it's also a great way to preempt any kind of concerns that a user might have towards trying out that product, because then you can add elements in that page that will help them to go towards the decision that you're trying to get them to go to.
Right. And so the content and the selling on the page has to make up for the longer funnel and the longer journey. Therefore, there's specific kinds of products that could benefit from that kind of education and selling that this feels more right for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and when you describe the journey, right, they go into the landing page and there's a sticky banner and then they go to the App Store. So I would think the more obvious way to optimize these campaigns is to run a conversion campaign, web conversion campaign that optimizes for clicks on the smart banner, because again, once they go through to the App Store, that's a different experience. So are you able to optimize these campaigns for post-install events, trials of purchases, or even installs?
Yeah, that is possible, because it can be web and mobile events. You always have DMMPs that you can use for the mobile events, and for the web events, we use Pivik, but it basically does the same thing as Google Analytics and tracking the events. And then we just bring them into our in-house backend system and then feed them back and using the Facebook's Pixel and their conversion API. So we're able to also then optimize for lower funnel events.
I see. Would you care to elaborate on how the Facebook Pixel and conversion APIs feed the purchase events, which are tracked by MMPs, to Facebook, so to speak? Yeah.
It's kind of a seamless journey, and that happens internally. Yeah, I think a BI engineer would be more astute here to explain. But essentially, in our backend system, after they're filtered through all of the attribution rules as well, they go through several other platforms and into our database, and then back to Facebook. So it's kind of a long, yeah.
I see. So would you say there's no off-the-shelf way? So let's just say there's a small developer that wants to build this and optimize for purchases. This would be really hard for them to do it in an off-the-shelf manner, or is there a simple solution that could be possible?
Yeah, you're right. It would be a little bit more difficult
Sure.
than to do it, but it's definitely worth the effort, I would say.
Yeah. I can imagine, right? Because again, if you're optimizing just for the leads, you're getting very top of the funnel metrics, and you haven't as much visibility into what happens downstream afterwards.
Yeah, Definitely. At the same time, I think even just having the leads is very different because the CTR is generally higher. You do get a lot more leads than maybe necessarily installs with app install campaigns. So that also helps. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of the user flows, right, for a web campaign for a mobile app, there are a number of different flows that are possible. One of what you described, which is take them to an article page that goes to the App Store. But there certainly are other possibilities. You could take them to a landing page that isn't like an article. You could take them to a page where they have to input their phone number. You send them a text message. So I'm saying that there's a number of different landing page flows that are possible. So in what cases is the landing page with an article the best, and when might some of the other flows be better?
Yeah, so it all comes down to what we were talking about, it being a native looking ad. So essentially when you have a landing page, it's very clear what the purpose is. It's very sales driven in a very obvious manner, which is also a great angle. However, for this particular flow where you're serving people, in this case, an article, it's a piece of written content, where you're not outwardly asking them to convert immediately, I think it makes sense that it's just a bit more subtle. And so, as I said, it's kind of a soft sell, whereas the landing page is more of a hard sell. Both approaches work, but I think also combined with the fact that, for example, on Facebook, the placement that works the best, from my experience, is one that actually also looks quote unquote native. So where you don't usually find that the usual ads ad placements. So the newsfeed placement is actually the one that works the best. And that's, I think, because it can be mistaken for a post that someone made or like a brand made that is organic. So for this organic approach, I feel like the soft sell is what works, what continues to work. Whereas for landing pages, it's a bit more of a hard sell, yeah.
Right. So you're saying if the product is something that's more of a softer sell, that needs more education, more information, that makes more sense.
Yeah, depending on the flow as well, meaning that also depending on the channel, because I imagine for a higher intent sort of platform, then you can send people to the landing page because they've already, I don't know, in Google searched for a similar product or on Pinterest or so on. But for Facebook, where you want to have a different approach and kind of be inclusive to all types of intent, then it makes sense to try to be a bit more subtle about it.
And I think you talked briefly about the placements, and did you say just the newsfeed works the best? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So of course, when I started testing this out, we used automatic placements, of course, to see which one performs the best. It's always been the newsfeed placement, and also, of course, every now and again challenging this best practice and coming to the same result. So I think that's definitely very, very interesting.
Yeah. And do you find some of the other placements, let's just say stories, to not work at all? Because that's something I definitely find curious, because Facebook pushes automatic placements somewhat aggressively. Why do you think some of the other placements don't work nearly as well?
Other placements do work, but they don't work when you want to scale them to a certain spend. So you can fight that fight, but essentially when you know that this is something where you can easily spend a lot more and in an efficient way, then of course it makes everything. Right. So another type of placement that we found sort of a smaller success with was the instant experience one, actually, the format, not the placement, sorry, but this format, because there you can kind of basically have the similar experience of like taking people to a landing page or another article without actually taking them out of the platform. So that I think that is definitely something that I think if you wanted to start with these kinds of ads on Facebook, it's something that you could use to kind of gauge if there's a good opportunity for you there without having to go through all of the engineering and BI.
Yeah. So on instant experience, what does the instant experience landing page look like?
It's basically, you can build this inside of the Facebook Ads Manager to mimic the appearance of the landing page or magazine article that you have. And so you can, of course, it's a bit more limited in terms of the elements that you can use on, but essentially you can add your quotes and your images and your blocks of text and have sort of a CTA buttons and have a similar experience to the one that you have in the article. Yeah.
Would you put in the entire article in an instant experience, or oh really? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's also like something that depends, and it's good to be tested because maybe sometimes you don't need to have the full story. But I would, knowing what works, I would start first with what I know works and then see if it can be improved on.
So the user goes to the instant experience, scrolls through the entirety of the article, and then there's a CTA that takes them to the App Store page. Right. I think that makes so much sense because, I can totally see the parallels between instant experience and the landing page, right? And I've certainly seen a lot of success for instant experience in e-com. So what you're saying makes so much sense, even for a product that's not e-com, but could benefit from that sort of softer self, right? Yeah. So another aspect of all of this, Violeta, that I'm very curious about is how testing works. Because certainly there's an additional variable in testing here, because you could be testing different ads or different articles. You could be testing a winning ad with a bad article and that could just lose. Or you could have a great article, but the ad may not be the best for it. That wouldn't do so well. So how do you approach testing with like these sets of variables of articles and ads?
Yeah, testing is always an interesting topic. The way that I generally do it is taking a proven article that we already know has a good conversion rate, and then if we already have an image that works, then that one as well. But essentially starting from like the strongest that we have for conversion, I think the main piece of creative here is the article essentially, and then testing out different images and titles to go with it. Because the title and the combination of title and image is basically the one that gives you the CTR. And you first have to reach a certain CTR, or obviously it's always good to have a high CTR in order to then also send them to the articles. So yeah, I would first start with a strong article and then test out different images and titles.
Right. And does Facebook's dynamic creative work well, where you basically give them 20 images and let them do their thing, or 20 different ad texts or headlines and do their thing? In this case, because the headline and the image do need to be somewhat very specific to the article, do you find the dynamic creative tends to work well, or what's been your experience?
In my experience, even though, it would be so much easier, right, to just feed all of the potential combinations in there. But in my experience, it's always been just a sort of manual, separate testing that has yielded the better results. Still, I think this is something that is one of those things that should be challenged periodically in case, if you can somehow automate this, then of course I'm all for that.
Right. Yeah. And so from what you were saying earlier, the landing page is the key creative asset. And the image and the headline are almost like the hook. They're important, certainly, but they're the hook. So you take a winning article, then you try to maximize the click-through rates to the winning article, which totally makes sense because the article is doing the heavy lifting of converting, right? And the headline and the image, they're eliciting the click, but they're not actually convincing or persuading the user. So I think that makes so much sense. And then, you guys also run campaigns, very significant ones on other paid content channels, Outbrain and Taboola, right? So how does the testing work on Facebook as compared to Outbrain and Taboola? So do you take a winning article from Outbrain and Taboola, roll that to Facebook? Do you find like completely different things work? what's the interrelationship between these platforms?
Well, initially we wanted to have different flows and essentially different angles for the articles that would go for the different platforms. And as we were testing a lot of different articles on all of the platforms, we realized that actually it's the same ones that work for Outbrain, Taboola, and Facebook. And so given that that is the team generally where the process lies of the creation of all of these pages, and there's obviously a lot of work being put into it and into creating the best converting combinations of elements in those pages. There's extensive brainstorms where we've always tried to come up with new angles for titles for the entire content as well. So essentially what is happening now is that I wait for initial test for Outbrain and Taboola, and then the promising ones I will also go on and test on Facebook in terms of articles. In terms of images, I would test maybe the same or different images, because it can happen that there's different images that for different platforms, but that's also kind of stuck very close together throughout the years. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that certainly surprises me that, because you would think algorithmically the kinds of users that read, let's just say, news site would be very different from those that look at Facebook. But it sounds like the kinds of people you're attracting for the product are roughly similar. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been a surprise. And yeah, generally it's taken, I guess, the budget that I would do for testing these things would then go towards the actual spend of the usual campaigns, instead of like continuously trying to test entirely new ideas, just resorting to having one process for creating these for paid social as well as
Right. Certainly, it's certainly much more efficient that way, right? Yeah.
exactly.
And in your time running and testing a lot of these native ad campaigns, what have been some of the bigger surprises that you have seen, and other examples that you can share?
I think most things to do with the best practices have been surprising. So including the fact that the audience reacts similarly on Facebook compared to Outbrain and Taboola, to the fact that it's always all the time been the newsfeed placement
Right.
that works the best, to the types of images being used. Surprising there is, it's usually images of people that work the best. So it does make sense. I think there's also some psychology around it, and it's also a certain angle. So it's the front angle where maybe you don't necessarily have someone staring right back at you, but you can see the eyes. So I think I remember reading something probably on about the psychology of this, where instantly, just because of the way that we're built, whenever we encounter another pair of eyes, even if we're scrolling on Instagram, we're just instantly attracted to it as humans. Because yeah, I guess back in the day we had to look out for danger or for enemies.
Yeah.
Is where that's an actual like. So yeah, now it's actually being used differently, in that it's used as a hook to get your attention on these platforms to check out ads.
Interesting. It's not just like a abstract psychological theory, that you actually see that, when you show more humans making eye contact, it works well. And would you say there are video ads that work better than just the static photos for a product like this, or does it not matter? What has been your experience?
I would say it definitely depends on the product. So I don't think there's a one size fits all, but what I can tell you from my experience is that it's always been static that has worked the best. Well, also for the longest time, even though I attempted some half illustration, real photo type creatives, it's always been the real image that has worked.
Uh-huh.
Probably, I think my hypothesis is also because it's in line with the whole native appeal. Most recently, I've seen that to change a tiny bit, and what we did was just add a bit of branding elements to the usual top performing photo, and that has seemed to work as well. And I think in the end it does create quite a smooth experience, because then you see the same kind of elements then on the page that you're taken to and then into the app. So it builds this sentiment of brand familiarity,
Right,
which is
right,
nice to
right.
have.
Yeah. I also sometimes wonder if static images can work well in a native context because users know they're not going to get any interactive content. Like, if you put a video, they know, oh, there's going to be an app, or I'm going to have there's going to be some amount of interactivity, so videos work well. And in this case, they're going to have to read, so not making it flashy makes it actually work well. I wonder if that's perhaps one reason as well.
Yeah, it's very possible. I think, we always in marketing talk about best practices, but I think the reality is that they obviously change because people get used to one thing, and then at some point the opposite that works. So, back in the day when we just were starting up on ads, things that were like very in your face were working, but then people just got, their attention was just so distraught with that. Then now it's stuff that is maybe more low key that is working, and so on. So
Sure.
from that point of view, it makes sense. Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. And just from having seen you guys' ads, I also get the impression that the headline also matters very significantly, right? Because again, for the static can just be almost a stock image. Certainly, it can appear that way, even if it isn't. But headline can be a bigger hook, and I'm just curious if that's really the case, and that you see in your data and your performance.
Yeah, so about the image, the stock photo aspect of things, yes, it's easier to, well, it's actually not easier to use stock photos, because when you know exactly what you're looking for, you'll find that it's actually very difficult to find in all of the databases out there.
Oh, wow.
So we actually did a lot of our photos in-house.
Okay.
And a lot of the people featured in our ads are colleagues, of course. So it's also kind of nice to see articles around articles working where people who actually work for them are, front and center. And when it comes to the title, that's definitely something that's very, very important. So I think there's an equal amount of testing in the content of the article, and also matching it to a catchy. This can definitely make or break whether or not someone clicks through or not.
Yeah, and ad title generally has to be different from the article title, so that these are two different things that you're testing at different times. Is that accurate?
Actually, what I found was that was not necessary. So you will have the same ad title, and then it's actually the title of the article as well.
Correct.
Sometimes there's variations, but there's not been an uplift in trying ones.
Right.
Yeah.
So there isn't, so people, the repetitiveness isn't a problem. If anything, it's reinforcing that, okay, this is exactly what I came to see.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem, because essentially you're clicking on an ad that has a title. It promises to talk to you about something, and then it just simply reappears, and it just confirms that that's what you're reading about.
This is also fascinating. Certainly something I will go back and listen to, and I've learned a lot from you today, just as I have in the past as well. This is perhaps a good place for us to start to wrap, Violeta. But before we do that, can you tell folks how they can find out more about you and everything you do?
Yeah, of course. I mean, follow us on Blinkist, on all the Blinkist socials, and at Blinkist.com, download the app. And you can always find me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful.
Also on SoundCloud sometimes.
Oh, great. Yeah, we can link to all of that. Yeah, SoundCloud, that's your music. Is that right?
It is my music. I'm not competing with you for podcasts.
No, it's not a contest, but you're a DJ just as well. So people can check that out, check out your SoundCloud just as well. We will link to all of that in the show notes. But Violeta, for now, we will let you carry on with today. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great week.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog.